So welcome to this Energy Strategy in Action webinar. I'm Stephen Agnew, I'm head of RenewableNI. Just to outline the plan a bit for today's event, I will be giving a presentation just generally on the work of RenewableNI and how it relates to the energy strategy, I suppose to some extent our objectives. And then I'll be followed by Meabh Cormacain from the Department for Economy, who'll be covering the energy strategy and action plan that it's just recently been published. And at the end, we'll take a Q&A and hopefully get through quite a bit. We've an hour and a half. So I think that should be plenty of time. I did a bit of a trial run on my presentation out in students this morning. I took 40 minutes with them.
Sorry to interrupt. There's a couple of people have posted that might not be able to hear you.
Okay, can you hear me, Judith? Yeah.
So yeah, I can hear you. Carol, Catherine, and Caroline have all said they can't hear. Is that correct?
Okay.
Can everybody else hear?
Yeah, I don't know. Certainly my microphone's on and it's been picked up, so I don't know if the volume in your own computers or laptops, but yeah.
Okay. Looks like a lot of people. So if you wouldn't mind, maybe the people who have difficulties, if you might do the obligatory log off and log on again.
Yeah, it's amazing how these things work. So hopefully most people can hear me, and those who haven't have only missed the intro. So fingers crossed. Any technical issues are being sorted. Speaking of which, I will share my screen, and as always with these things, hope that goes well. So you just confirm everybody can see that, okay?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, I suppose the title of my part of the presentation is Achieving Zero, and I'll sort of go into a bit of why that is. But firstly, I'll just kick off by explaining a little bit about RenewableNI. So for those who don't know us, RenewableNI is the trade association and voice for the renewable electricity industry in Northern Ireland. We typically cover wind, solar, tidal and battery storage technologies, although we would have members with other interests in terms of our policy work. That's where our focus has been to date. And we're a collaboration of Renewable UK and Wind Energy Ireland. So I think going back about 12 years now, they came together to create an industry body in Northern Ireland, and so RenewableNI works closely with both bodies to, I suppose, ensure we're connected in to what's going on in the electricity industry across the islands, and equally that our parent associations are connected into with what's going on in Northern Ireland. Here's some of our members. I apologise to any people with a design background in here. I'm pleased to say it's getting increasingly difficult to get all our members into one slide. But I think you're all there. Any members who don't see themselves, drop me an email. And anyone who's not a member who would like to see themselves there, certainly get in touch. Really, as you can see from our membership, we've members from right across renewable electricity, from large and small scale developers, wind and solar, and then those in the supply chain. So if you're involved in any way in renewable electricity and want to be involved and get involved in the industry body, just drop me an email. My contact details will be up at the end of this presentation. And just a wee bit about what our member involvement is. We've got various fora which our members can take part in to share industry knowledge and I suppose to give me the intelligence to make representations on behalf of the industry to policymakers and regulators. So I suppose just getting into the policy of it then, from 40 by 20 to 0 by 50, I deliberately mix metrics in this slide because I think it charts the journey that the policy environment has gone on. If the document on the left was the Strategic Energies Framework, which set the target for 40% renewables by 2020. I suppose jumping immediately to the right, we've got a new energy strategy that aims for net zero energy by 2050. And indeed, RenewableNI has an ambition for net zero power by 2035, and I'll come on to that in a bit more detail. So we've moved, I think, even as the industry body for renewables, we recognise that renewables aren't an end in of themselves. They're a means to reducing the carbon intensity of our power system and ultimately our heat and transport system as we seek to electrify those sectors. And I suppose the overall objective is, of course, to reduce our climate impact and hope to keep climate warming below 1.5 degrees if possible. And I suppose I just left a protest at Stormont arguing for a strong climate bill, and that's something that RenewableNI has lobbied for, because we do see ourselves as part of that wider I suppose solution to the climate crisis. Sorry, jumping ahead a bit too quickly. We've published a number of reports in recent years. Perhaps, if anything, too many to sometimes get the message across of what's in each of them. But two key ones I'm going to cover off in this presentation: the Achieving Zero, a Baringa report which charted a pathway to net zero power, and one of its key conclusions was that we can get to net zero power with technologies known to us today. So whilst, yes, there'll be innovations in terms of efficiency and development of markets, etc., we know the technologies now. We're not relying on the hope of new technologies. We know how to do zero carbon power. It will, of course, take time to get there, but we have a pathway that shows us at least one way that could be achieved, and that Achieving Zero report, as with all our reports, is on the RenewableNI website. Powering the Green Economy was a KPMG report, looking at now and at 2030, the contribution that the onshore wind sector currently makes and what it could make by 2030, and I'll go into some of the details of the figures that came out of that report. But needless to say, it concludes that the renewables industry stands ready to make a significant contribution to the Northern Ireland economy and a green recovery. If and it's I suppose why we're here today, if the right policies are in place. So key objectives for RenewableNI, as I've mentioned, zero carbon power by 2035, and I suppose as a staging post, 80% renewable electricity by 2030. Now, most of you, I'm sure, will be aware the energy strategy sets a target of 70% renewable electricity by 2030. I'll be honest, when I came into post, that was the key objective that I was given. But equally, our membership has got together to say, now that we have the roadmap for zero carbon power. We feel that 80% is the right staging post. Now the department strategy says at least 70. I suppose we're talking about up to 80% renewable electricity. So look, I don't think we're far away. I'm not being critical of the department, but it's our job, I think, to push for more ambitious targets and faster delivery. And again, when it comes to the climate crisis, I don't think you can go fast enough, never mind too fast. We'll need a number of interventions to get there. Extension of the CFD scheme to Northern Ireland, just briefly for those who aren't aware, the Contracts for Difference scheme is the support scheme operating in Great Britain. In the absence of such a support scheme, we've seen a contraction in the renewable electricity industry in Northern Ireland for a number of years. There were 3 years where no new wind farms, no new large-scale renewables of any kind were connected. And we're only, I suppose, in a way, starting to see Northern Ireland projects come out of that. What was, I suppose, a shock to the market at the time. And we've just seen 2 new wind farms connect this year, the first in 3 years. So while that's welcome, it's not enough to reach 70%, never mind 80% renewables. And we do need some form of support scheme to add certainty to renewables investment in Northern Ireland. The Republic of Ireland has the RES scheme, the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme. Great Britain has CFD, and currently Northern Ireland has nothing. But again, as Meabh no doubt will cover, there is a commitment in the Energy Strategy Action Plan to consult on a support scheme this year for delivery next year. So I'll maybe leave it to Meabh to say more about that, or potentially get into it when the questions start. Something else we need, and very topical at the minute, is a facilitative planning system. Planning timelines in Northern Ireland are significantly longer than in Great Britain or in the Republic of Ireland. So as well as there being less market support, there are additional challenges in terms of planning timelines and therefore the associated costs. There is currently a review of renewables planning policy underway, and RenewableNI will be feeding into that. We've just seen published a report on the Planning Act, and indeed an Audit Office report today on the planning system. So it's in great focus, which is good. But very much of the discussion has been around policy, which of course we want, if it can be improved, that's something we want to see. But really where my focus is about resourcing, because it's the speed of our system rather than necessarily the outcomes that is the main issue at present. So as well as looking for I suppose, policy that's facilitative, we need a properly resourced planning system that can deliver efficiently. Again, if we want to get the type of megawatts on the system and the type of level we're talking about in ultimately a short space of time. It came up something recently. It took us 25 years to get to our 2020 target. We've got 8 years to get to our 2030 target at this point. So, really it is about delivering quickly, efficiently. And that's not something we've been doing to date, and several reports bear that out. Developer-led grid investment, I'll not go into great detail, but I suppose it was our key ask of the Shaping Our Electricity Future roadmap from Sony. That is the way forward for Northern Ireland, and we're delighted that Sony has recognised that, and we'll be working with Sony indeed. We haven't confirmed yet, but we're planning a grid webinar, I think off the top of my head, in June. And so yeah, we'll hopefully get somebody from Sony to speak about their plans from the Shaping roadmap. And then finally, NI inclusion in the future, Crown Estate leasing. The Minister was very clear when we met him recently that the 70% target is an onshore target, and we were pleased to get that assurance with a commitment to start delivering 1 gigawatt of offshore from 2030. That really needs to get the Crown Estate on board. They put a number of challenges to policymakers in Northern Ireland in terms of moving things on from a consenting perspective in terms of our own systems. But we've seen that work underway by the department. Again, maybe Meabh might speak more to that. You know, we need the Crown Estate. Ultimately, it's the seabed rights belong to them, and we need their engagement in Northern Ireland. We understand why it hasn't been a focus in recent years, but we want to make sure it is a focus in future years. Just very briefly then on zero carbon power, this is a table from the Achieving Zero Baringa report, and it really just shows the steps that could be taken to go from, well, we're currently at about 2.8 megatons of carbon power emissions from our power sector. That could be down to 1.3 if we achieve 70%, and then they take the next sort of detail the next iterative steps to get the fully zero carbon. That'll in the first instance be more renewables, getting to 80%, but then bringing things like hydrogen and long duration storage onto the system to start to, I suppose, wean ourselves off the backup generation of fossil fuels and replace them fully with zero carbon services. You know, not going greatly into the detail, but you know, if you kind of want to know the you know, what do we do in a zero carbon power system when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine, Baringa kind of give us a pathway of what we do and how we do, how we I suppose have a stable and secure zero carbon power system. We've set the target by for 2035. That's in line with the International Energy Agency, who've said all advanced economies should be at zero carbon power by 2035. And indeed, Great Britain has recently set that target for itself. We think a similar target should be in place in Northern Ireland. The Baringa study actually says it could be done by 2030. That would certainly be challenging. But I think, again, to reiterate, the main finding, I think, was that we have the technologies that are known to us now. It is about how quickly can we roll them out. You know, we certainly wouldn't object to a more ambitious target, but we think zero carbon power by 2035 is in line with other regions, and you know, where the international kind of policy framework is moving to, and if we can do it quicker, of course, we'd be delighted to do so. And then just a point on the 80 by 30 target. There was a couple of reports. NIE published a report called Network for Net Zero, which estimated that net the achieving 70% renewables would save the consumers about 1% on their bills. So although yes, a lot of investment is required in the grid, actually the savings through wholesale costs more than make up for those investments. Baringa then took that almost as the baseline and said, well, what if we went to 80? And their estimate is consumers would save an additional £50 million if we went to 80% renewables. And again, that's net of any cost for investment or a support scheme that would be required. In terms of just what does that look like in megawatts, I mean, it's sort of commonly talked about to get to 70%, we roughly need to double our renewable electricity capacity. We're currently at around 1.7 gigawatts of renewables on the system. To go to 80% based on Sony's energy, tomorrow's energy scenarios by Sony, we'd need an additional 1.1 gigawatt of onshore wind, 900 megawatts of solar PV, and 500 megawatts of offshore wind. It's certainly debatable if we can get offshore projects connected and operational by 2030. RenewableNI members, I know, a number looking at projects and are committing to working to that timeline. And if we can't achieve that timeline, obviously any shortfall in offshore wind that might come later on the system, if we're to achieve 80 by 30, we would need that sort of replaced, that equivalent, I suppose, onshore. So very much, as I alluded to earlier, the journey to 2030 is very much an onshore one, with offshore hopefully coming on stream from 2030 onwards. And the slide says onshore wind generates more than just electricity. You know, we talk about powering the green economy and a green recovery from COVID. The investments in renewables alone could create an additional 750 to 1,000 jobs. That's before, for example, you take the likes of the investment in the grid. So we've seen NIE just in the past week or so announce 110 new jobs. So they wouldn't be included in these figures. These were looking specifically at the onshore wind industry. So it's a considerable contribution to our economy, and one that we feel that policymakers should very much get behind. In terms of the report by KPMG actually goes into individual council level figures, but just as a bit of an overview, the onshore wind contributes 15 million a year in rates to local councils. That could increase to 25 million. Again, if the targets that we've set out here, and again, these are in line, the 1.1 gigawatts in line with what's planned for in Sony's Shaping Our Electricity Future document. If that 1.1 gigawatts additional renewables is achieved, or additional onshore wind, I should say, the contribution in rates will go up to £25 million. And I know for some councils, I could see as much as 4 million a year from onshore wind alone. And in total, KPMG estimate the onshore wind sector could contribute 3.1 billion in GVA to our local economy. I think one of their examples was that was greater than the whole hotel industry in Northern Ireland. So, you know, we're not just, as an industry, I don't think we're just part of the energy system. We are very much now a cornerstone of the Northern Ireland economy, and say that will only grow as we build towards net zero. So just finally, then, this webinar is part of a series we'll be running throughout 2022. You can see there we plan to do something that a lot of our work, as you'll have seen in the reports, has been on onshore wind, but our members are engaged in solar PV, so we're going to take a bit of a deep dive into solar PV and our future plans in that regard. Then in May, we'll look at the planning issues. We'll have had the consultation, or at least the responses to the issues paper by then, and I think this is a big year for planning, particularly for renewables and green infrastructure. So I think it'll be timely to discuss that. Then, as I mentioned earlier, in June we'll look at getting grid. You know, our members stand ready to develop new projects, but they won't do that if they can't get connected and can't sell their electricity. So we'll look at plans for grid investment in Northern Ireland, and then provisionally we're looking at potentially an offshore focused webinar in September, culminating then in our Smart Energy Conference, which will, all going well, be an in-person event. And keep an eye on the events page of our website for further details of all those events. So that's it from me. Judith, I'm hoping that Meabh's been able to join us, has she?
She has, yes. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, then I will stop sharing and hand over to Meabh Cormacain, who I think it's fair to say has been one of the key architects of the energy strategy. So Meabh, I'll hand over to you. And Meabh, if you're talking, you're on mute.
You just find you're on the list. You should have rights.
Okay.
She's saying she's on mute.
I'm wondering, did Meabh come in on the presenter link, or hold on, let's see.
Maybe I'm just going to search through all the attendees and manually turn you back on.
Okay. Okay, I suppose maybe just while we're waiting on technical issues, are there any initial questions? We'll do a further Q&A once Meabh's done her presentation, but maybe if there's any initial questions, if people want to pop them in the chat. And
Maybe that should be you now, showing that you do have presenter rights. Yep.
Yes, thank you. Apologies, I take full responsibility for clicking the incorrect link there, everybody. So I hope you can all hear and see me.
yeah,
sounds like it. So I'm Meabh Cormacain. I'm going to take you through a presentation on the energy strategy. Judith, are you able to go through the presentation? I generally have pretty bad luck with Teams. If not, I can bring it up myself, but if you were able to, that would be helpful.
Yeah, unless Stephen, unless you already have it handy. People don't mind, bear with me 1 second. Okay, just opening this line, Meabh.
Thanks, Judith.
Do a Chris Whitty, and you just do your next slide, please. I'm just gonna.
Will do. And I'll take advantage of this moment just to apologise in advance if a small child appears at any point in the next 45 minutes or so. I'm home alone, so there's no one else to turn to if there's a need for, I don't know, Iron Man channel switching or anything like that. Okay.
Okay, Meabh. So yeah, just direct me as.
That's you, Stephen. Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. If you just go to slide view, because there's quite a lot of writing in some of these slides, so just to make it easier for people.
And we have 2 sets of slides. Sorry, folks.
Okay, Jeff, if I do the slides, you do the sort of admins, people come in and out, you do the waiting room.
Look, I'll start talking through the kind of the structure of the presentation today anyway, just while we get the slide view up. So effectively, I'm going to talk you through the energy strategy that was published just before Christmas, but formally launched a couple of weeks ago at W5, along with an action plan. The presentation's effectively in 3 parts. It's a little bit of background, which I think is useful for people to perhaps understand just the process that's been involved to get us here. It's then the actual energy strategy, what it is, what it means, and what government expects to do. And it's then what are the immediate steps that we're going to take over the next 12 months. So it's a fairly simple structure. So if we just flick on the next couple of slides. Yeah, and the next one. So if we just kick off with how we got here. So it has been a significant amount of work, as many of you will understand and appreciate, and have perhaps even been involved in. I've just highlighted here what we've been doing for the last 2.5 years to produce a strategy. And the very first thing we did was to start coordinating across government. We understood that we couldn't produce any kind of a helpful energy strategy that didn't have all of government involved. So that was almost the first action that the Department for the Economy took. Was to involve other government departments. We've had a few very specific, I suppose, public-facing consultation periods, which I've just highlighted in bold. So we issued a call for evidence way back in 2019, which is open for about 3.5 months. We did a lot of work, then issued a consultation on policy options in March last year, which again was open for about 3 months. But outside and beyond of that, and everywhere you see an arrow, we have started something and we continue to do it. So as I said, we started with government coordination and that continues. We went beyond government to collaborate with external stakeholders, whether they be statutory bodies, councils, industry, etc. That was started a long time ago and that continues. We've been commissioning and building on our research base, and that is an ongoing process. I'll talk a little bit about that later. We've developed a new energy model for Northern Ireland. That again is not a static process. That's an ongoing piece of work that will be built upon annually to help us understand progress on the energy strategy. And we've been developing not just a strategy, which is clearly the longer term direction of travel, but at a fairly high level. We've also been developing policy. And some of you will be aware of specific policies that have been in development to support the actual implementation of the strategy. So the detail. And when we look at policy development, there's an awful lot more of that detailed policy to come. Next slide, please. As I said, there's been 2 public-facing consultations. This is just a very quick overview of the most recent one, which I know many of you will have responded to. It was quite a detailed set of consultation questions, about 80 in total. There were some quite specific proposals, some more kind of general proposals within that consultation, and we're very pleased to see that in terms of responses, overwhelmingly people were in support of the proposals that we've put forward, I suppose particularly the high level ones in terms of our vision and our high level objectives. We had a large number of responses to that, a good mix of consumers, domestic business consumers, the energy sector and others. And we also wanted to understand a bit more about domestic consumers, and so we held 5 workshops with consumers to understand in a little bit more detail some of the issues that were coming out of the consultation and the strategy. And beyond that, we were conscious that we wanted to get more information from businesses. So we also issued a survey last year to 150 businesses to get, again, feedback from a specific business perspective on some of the proposals in that options consultation. Next slide, please. So nothing in energy ever sits still, as you all well know. Just to highlight some of the other changes that have influenced and will continue to influence, I suppose, any energy strategy, particularly for Northern Ireland. So the first change here is when we kicked off the energy strategy process, it was very much about decarbonising energy. It wasn't decarbonising Northern Ireland. That is obviously the remit of DAERA. And we have now seen the publication of a green growth consultation from DAERA, which amongst other things sets out proposals for climate action plans with sector specific emissions targets. So these sector specific targets will have an impact upon our own targets and will give us in DFE as well as across government a much better understanding of where we're making progress on carbon emission reduction right across the economy. We've seen publication from the Department of Finance, uplift to standards on building regulations, and there's another few phases of that process to go up until 2027. More broadly, and well beyond our own control, is the steep rise in fossil fuel prices, which is impacting absolutely everyone. And I'm sure you're also opening your electricity and oil or gas bills with a bit of a gasp these days. We have seen significant tariff increases. And we've also seen the opening conclusion of COP26, which did set out more specific commitments. We know the direction of travel we're going, but there were caveats, and we're perhaps not seeing the clarity of global direction and climate that some people would like to see. But we do monitor what's happening elsewhere, and we do understand that decisions, policies, and even laws could have an impact upon how quickly or not we progress with certain aspects of the energy. Next slide, please. The energy strategy itself, and what I'm going to do here is take in a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I'm sure whistle-stop tour. I know a lot of you will have seen it, be aware of it, be aware maybe the bits that impact you. I know that there's quite a lot of people registered for this seminar, so I haven't focused in on any one area. I am keeping it at a fairly generic high level. More than happy to take questions at the end on specific points. but I will kind of try and cover everything here. So apologies, that there is quite a lot, and especially apologies to those of you who may have attended previous presentations. It will be slightly repetitive. So if we take us to the next slide then. The vision that we proposed in the consultation was of net zero carbon and affordable energy, and pretty much everyone said that's a good vision, stick with it. But just to break down what that means, the net zero carbon energy bit is fairly well measurable. It means that overall greenhouse gas emissions from the energy sector, which is to say from buildings, from transport, from power, etc., are zero. So effectively reducing carbon emissions and then offsetting those that remain. So that's the net zero carbon. But the affordable energy bit is actually a bit more complicated and something that still needs work for us to understand better, because affordable energy can mean different things to different people and different groups of people, and indeed at different times. So it can mean something to a household in the middle of winter who's perhaps on benefits or in vulnerable situations, compared to a business who's seeking to become more competitive in a global economy. So affordable energy does mean different things. We've chosen 3 metrics that we will measure for now to assess how successful we are. The first of these is a very familiar metric to many people, which is households and fuel poverty. The second is also a domestic metric, which is energy expenditure as a proportion of all household expenditure. And importantly, that takes in not just the cost of your power and your heat, but also transport energy. And as we look at a more integrated energy system, it is important that we capture all energy costs for the householder, particularly if we're looking at electrification, for example, of heat and transport. And the third metric that we will use is effectively business expenditure as a percentage of turnover. So these are 3 of the metrics that we will monitor on an ongoing basis, and we will also be doing more work on refining our understanding of affordable energy. Next slide, please. The energy strategy itself has a vision, as I've just said, of net zero carbon energy by 2050. So that's where we're trying to get to. But the strategy focuses on this decade. So the decade of 2030, slightly less than a decade now, of course. So the policies and the proposals really focus on what needs to be done in the next 8 years. And this is lifted directly from the strategy. This shows you this image, what we need to do by 2030 in order to reach net zero energy by 2050. So if you look at on the right hand side there, a 56% reduction in carbon emissions from 1990 by 2030, and that graph shows you, as we've mapped the policies that we've said we'll take forward, the emission reductions is what this graph shows for each of these sectors. So these have been modelled using the energy transition model, which it's a simulation tool, a what if you do this, what happens, and it helps us understand trade-offs right across the energy system. It is a live and almost in time energy model. If you're interested, I can send you a link. You can actually go in and switch a little toggle about, if you get more offshore wind, what happens? If you remove oil boilers overnight, what happens? So it's an interactive tool that anyone can play with. It's open source. It's going to be subject to ongoing improvement and updates, and also better data inputs as we improve our data. And as you can see there, already we need significant reductions by 2030. There's a very challenging time ahead of us. But if we do that, we will be on the trajectory that we need by 2050. So the next slide. This is just a short graphic, which in essence, a chapter within the strategy aims to set out a little bit better the costs and the benefits of the investment that's required. And it's probably very familiar to all of you, but in effect, what we're talking about is, for net zero carbon energy, significant upfront capital costs, ongoing operational savings. The tipping point between costs and savings is different depending on which sector you look at. This is based on the Committee for Climate Change's balanced pathway. But ultimately, it is that upfront capital ongoing operational savings. So the big question for us at the department and for many others is, how do we enable that upfront access to capital, finance the savings that will come down the line? But what we also did in the strategy was try and put into context the investment for net zero. So we're not just spending a whole load of money from a base of nothing to get to net zero carbon energy. It was trying to put that in the context of, what do we spend today on energy in Northern Ireland? And that's effectively, that's that top blue number, the annual baseline energy spending on the current system. So when we talk about the cost of getting to net zero, it's actually incremental to that number. And I think what we would all like to see is more of that money that we're currently spending on energy to be spent locally. And the way of doing that is by reducing reliance on imported fossil fuels. I suppose it's a key method of getting there. So that's just a brief overview of what we did in terms of looking at the costs of net zero for Northern Ireland, net zero energy. Next slide, please. There's a lot in here. It's effectively just a screenshot from the strategy. It's just letting you know that the principles that we proposed in the strategy, which I'm going to go through now, they remained more or less the same. After consultation, we did make a few changes, but they're still effectively circular. They're still about placing you at the heart of our energy future, and that's really important, because we know that people need to come with us. But all of the other principles are connected, and the thing about the strategy is that you can pull one strand of the strategy and it will be felt elsewhere. So we can't be looking at individual policies in silos. We have to understand how they connect right across with other policies within energy, outside of energy, outside of the Department for the Economy, and in other departments as well. So we understand the interconnectedness of the energy strategy and the principles within it. Next slide, please. So the next 5 slides are effectively the 5 principles that we've landed on and some of the key policies. I'm not actually going to go through the objectives. They're there and you can read them. They're in the strategy themselves. But the objectives do set out what it is we hope to achieve under the principle. The bullet points beneath then are effectively the key policy areas, not the only policies, but the key policy areas that we have committed to taking forward to start to deliver on those objectives. So the very first one is information and awareness campaigns. It's not something that DFE alone will do. It's obviously something that will work with DAERA in terms of that programme of decarbonisation for Northern Ireland. But people need to understand that changes are coming, why they're coming, how they can be part of these changes, and what they need to know. And that leads us very neatly into our next key policy area, which is to set up a one-stop shop. Overwhelming responses to the consultation said we need a place to go that can just help us, whether it's with information, advice, support. Is it somewhere when there's grants that we can go to, that we can get the grants, a place that we can trust the information? So the one-stop shops, and we've looked at models elsewhere, is something that we've committed to taking forward for energy. In the energy transition to net zero, people will need protection, and we have some good protection measures for consumers in Northern Ireland, but we need to see where the gaps are and how we fill those gaps in the energy transition, and not just protection, but redress. So if something goes wrong, we need ways in which we can help consumers. And the final key policy is that support framework for energy affordability. As I mentioned earlier, affordability means different things to different people, and we need to get a better grasp of what that means and what the framework will be. Understanding, for example, if we transition to a more energy efficient home with no oil boiler, for example, oil bills fall down, but your monthly or your weekly electricity bill could skyrocket. And how do we ensure that people understand the kind of the budgeting requirements for that? What does that support framework look like for society as a whole? So we need to build that support framework for the full energy transition and not just any single part of it. Thank you. So the next principle is to grow the green economy. Nice succinct objectives there. You can read them yourselves, and I suppose 3 specific ones. So a centre of excellence for hydrogen, the need for skills. We understand that we have some of the skills that we need for the energy transition. We by no means have them all, so we need to work on identifying those and filling the gaps. And we need to look at innovation and low carbon technologies, and that also includes funding for those, which I will talk about because they come up in the action plan later. So the next slide, do more with less, is very much an energy efficiency principle, but not just energy efficiency, energy reduction as well. So you can see their objectives. They focus on buildings. The first two focus on buildings, existing buildings and new buildings. And the third is about energy reduction in transport. So our key policies are to set minimum standards for energy efficiency in buildings. This will be on a phased basis. It won't be overnight, and it will involve different departments. I'll come on to that in the action plan. But we will set minimum standards for existing buildings. In order to support people with these new standards, they're going to need support and they're going to need funding. So retrofitting of buildings will have a grant scheme effectively set up, and we also need to unlock finance to support people to invest to retrofit the buildings. So they very much go hand in hand, the minimum energy efficiency and the retrofit funding. Then in terms of buildings, yes, new buildings. We need to build better buildings, and that's something the Department of Finance has started the process and will be continuing on a phased basis, as I mentioned. And then the final policy here is not about buildings at all, but it's about that local transport strategy. And we've been working with the Department for Infrastructure right the way through. This is something that they'll be taking the lead on with responsibility for transport. And that's effectively how to get people out of cars and into more active transport. And that in itself is a whole other sphere of work. And that will involve, I suppose, different approaches for rural and urban areas. So that's the local transport strategy from DFI. That's, yeah, just a number to let you know about the kind of approximate savings we're looking to make from buildings and industry. Next slide then is presumably, like all the others, of particular relevance to those on this webinar. To replace fossil fuels with renewable energy. 6 short words, an awful lot in here. So Stephen's already talked through targets. Now the industry is looking for a target of 80% by 2030. We have set out at least 70% electricity consumption from renewable sources by 2030. We're talking about heating, so we're replacing high carbon heating with low and zero carbon heating. That again is a small number of words for a very big challenge, because we're talking about nearly every single home and business in Northern Ireland. And transport is the last one here. So to support the transition to low and zero carbon fuels for vehicles, the policies here, very linked. So the first thing is to set up a support scheme for renewable electricity. I'm sure people on this webinar are much more able than I am to talk about why that is needed, but that is one of our priorities. We will take slightly different approaches to the phasing out of home heating oil and the phasing out of coal and certain solid fuels, so they won't be in the same time frame. But in order to phase out fossil fuels for heating, we also need to have something to replace them with. So we need to implement that support scheme for low carbon heat as well, to start to build the supply chain, to start to build the skills and build the capabilities to replace fossil fuels as we use them. That will also mean the emerging heat solutions, and I suppose geothermal was the one that came up most frequently in the consultation. So we need to set out trials and demonstrations in Northern Ireland, and then finally for transport, to set out a roadmap for cleaner transport, and there's a specific action on that in the action plan, which I'll come to shortly. The next and final principle, if we just go on to the next slide, is to bring it all together beautifully, to create a flexible, integrated and resilient energy system. So this is where it all comes together, and I suppose to think very kind of simplistically about it, in the first instance, it's about connecting the electricity system in a better way, but not just the electricity system. It's also thinking how we connect the electricity and gas systems, for example, to ensure a resilient, integrated, flexible system that works, that is secure, that delivers for consumers, etc. So first of all, to do that, we want to understand, what does resilience in a changing energy system mean? When we look back at the programme for government, or the previous draft programme for government in 2016, there was a single outcome for energy, which was about security of supply, supply margins. Is that really what's going to be useful for the energy sector in the next decade as we transition towards lower carbon sources of energy? Unlikely. So we will look to review our definitions and our understanding of energy resilience. We need to implement system flexibility. We all know, and again, people in this call know much better than I do, that we need to have a more responsive system. We've been fantastic at getting new generation onto our electricity system. We haven't been as fantastic at managing the demand. So we need to get better at the demand storage and management side of it. And so that's kind of building in the flexibility and improving our flexibility. And to do that, we need the smart measures. So we need more data, and we've set out we need data and accessible data at a system level as well as a consumer level. And this then brings in specific tools, for example, smart metering. And then that leads us to the role of active consumers, but not just active consumers, energy communities, and what they look like in the future. What is an active consumer? Who can we expect to be active? What do they need and what do they want? And how do we manage to support the active consumers while also ensuring that those who just don't care that much about what happens and when, and they just want to switch something on and it works at a reasonable price, how can we make sure that they are also protected? Which I suppose leads us full circle into putting you at the center of the energy transition. But also energy communities. There are some very good examples of energy communities in Northern Ireland. They're probably seen as a fairly narrow range of perhaps wind turbines, single wind turbines, or solar cooperatives. Are there other models out there for energy communities? Are there other ways of encouraging energy communities, and how will that contribute to our changing energy system? So that's the last of the principles in the strategy. Just to point out that when we published the strategy in December, it wasn't just the strategy. So this is what you can find on the website should you go looking. The Path to Net Zero Energy, the energy strategy. We also published a consultation summary, which was a summary of all 283 responses to 80 questions, very, very summarized. The three documents in the middle are effectively data, evidence, and metrics based. So the statistical methodology report, which talks through some of the measures that we are, as I said, in terms of affordability, for example, what the methodology is behind those. An energy evidence program, which is building research and data and evidence, and it's ongoing. And a metrics dashboard, which is kind of a somewhat interactive dashboard on the website as well. As well as that, the SEA screening report. And in January, when there was the formal launch of the energy strategy, we also published the action plan, which the final bit of my presentation will talk through. So if we move on to the next slide and the next steps, and the next slide again, please. And again, thank you. I'm not going to talk about the detail of any of these actions, and you're probably all very familiar with them, and I can take questions on these actions as well as anything in the presentation. I may be able to ask some of my colleagues on the call to answer other questions on the actions, but I will say that if there's questions that you have on the action plan or the strategy and that I can't answer or colleagues can't answer, I can take those away and you know, we can have a dialogue via email if necessary. So just very briefly, the actions in the action plan, this is what government will do this year. So it's kick-starting the process of delivering the strategy. So under our first principle of placing you at the heart of our energy future, we can't establish a one-stop shop today. It will require legislative change, but we will produce a detailed plan for the timescales and what the remit of that one-stop shop is likely to be. The second action is focusing on fuel poverty, and that will be led by the Department for Communities, who have the remit for fuel poverty. So they will look at that steering group on actions to reduce fuel poverty. So that's again very specific about consumers and vulnerable consumers. And if you'll recollect, we talked about protection for consumers. There will also be a call for evidence on protection for consumers during the energy transition, and that will be something that will be delivered by the regulator and the Consumer Council. So they're the three key actions under the first principle. The next principle then, there will be funding delivered through a Green Innovation Challenge Fund. as we talked about funding innovation. We mentioned the need for skills. We will carry out an energy skills audit. So that's going to be focused on, I think the immediate and medium-term energy skills needs. There's also then work to be done on the longer-term skills needs, but we will carry out an audit this year. And we will progress a hydrogen centre of excellence in Northern Ireland as well. The next principle, quite a lot here. As I said, this is very much about the energy efficiency of buildings. So an energy efficiency scheme for domestic consumers. So that's effectively funding and some form of grant scheme for domestic consumers for retrofit. There will also be a non-domestic energy efficiency scheme. Central government has an established energy management strategy, which has been ongoing for, I think, three or 4 years. We will deliver additional funding for central government to deliver energy savings in its own premises and in its own estate. I mentioned that we would set energy efficiency standards, but that they would be phased. So the first phase is minimum energy efficiency standards in the domestic private rented sector. And that is something the Department for Communities will lead on, and they hope to consult, I think, later on this year on energy efficiency standards for the private rented sector in Northern Ireland. And then the final action here, as I said, is about new buildings. So that is an action under DOF to progress the building regulations for new buildings. That's our energy efficiency measures this year. Actions on replacing fossil fuels with renewable energy. I've already mentioned a electricity support scheme that's to be consulted on this year. Most of the rest of this list, 13 to 17, are about low carbon heat demonstrators, geothermal demonstrators, biomethane, committed development, which is sitting with DFI for low carbon heat, with the exception of 14, and I know Stephen's already mentioned, an action plan to deliver 1 gigawatt of offshore wind from 2030. And then the final action here is an EV infrastructure action plan that's actually building on the EV infrastructure task force, which was announced by Minister Mallon last year. I think it might have been December, before Christmas anyway. So they're the key actions for government this year, from DFI, DFE, DERA on the biomethane, and who else? And DOF, yeah. Okay, and then the final principle on a flexible, integrated, resilient energy system is to start to pull together the smart systems and flexibility into kind of a cohesive approach through a smart systems flexibility plan, and progress cost benefit analysis of smart meters, which is smart meters, not just necessarily the tool, but the capabilities of smart meters. And then there's 2 more. If we go on to the next slide, we've talked about delivering the strategy. To deliver the strategy, and I suppose these are kind of cross-cutting issues this year, we asked, and we were told loud and clear, and we understand that the legislation and regulation in place is not sufficient to deliver what we're attempting to achieve. So we will also this year review legislative and regulatory requirements in the context of our new energy decarbonisation goals. And we will also have an ongoing programme with an awful lot of work this year on further evidence, which is research and data collection, and also understanding better the linkages across our energy system. So I mentioned the energy transition model. There are further layers to that that can be taken forward to help us understand trade-offs across the energy system as we develop our policies. So I think I just have, yeah, if you just click again, it bounces. I would ask, if you haven't already signed up via this link for updates, I would encourage you to do so. We have been issuing regular e-bulletins for the last year and a half, call it. I can't even remember when we started. So we issue monthly e-bulletins with updates on the energy strategy, but there's also funding opportunities. There's also specific consultations. There's actually one consultation live at the minute on heat networks. So if you sign up to this email address, just send an email off, then we will be able to keep you informed as we go along of new research, policy development, open consultations, etc. So I suppose my final slide is to encourage you to stay engaged, to stay involved, and I suppose also to thank you to those who responded to consultations and call for evidence, for those who contributed to the working groups, those who were involved the whole way along. I'm happy to stop there. I think there's been some time left for either a discussion or questions, so just let me know what is most helpful for you at this point.
So we've been asked if you could show item 1 to 3, and I've checked that's, Stephen, you'll have to do it, the slide on the energy action plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I'll do that now. 2 seconds, sorry.
That's it in yellow there. I think you've gone past it.
Oh, sorry.
Probably slide 12, is that one there? Oh, no, sorry, it's even further down in the action plan, the next yellow slide. Yeah, 20. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. There we go. And was there a question on that, sorry, Judith, or was it just somebody wanted to say it again?
Not yet, but if the person has a question.
So I think I'm right in saying, Meabh, this is lifted straight from the action plan. So if people want to view it at their leisure, it'll be on the department's website.
Yeah, and there's a little bit more detail. So I've just lifted the action itself, but the action plan, which is on the website, tells you a little bit of the kind of detailed background to each of those actions, as well as which department or statutory body is actually leading on it.
Yep. So I'll maybe take that off. Just as I say, it's the action plan's published and obviously available for people to view. So in bad admin from me at the start, I didn't say to people, but if you want to ask questions, if you type into the chat, and I think I'm right in saying, Judith, if people want to ask their question directly, we can unmute them and let them do so.
Yes, mics are on mute and your cameras are now enabled.
Okay, so yeah, open to questions. Maybe if I kick off in the first instance, Meabh, I think probably a crucial action for our industry, for the renewable electricity industry, will be the renewable energy support scheme. I know there's a consultation plan, so nothing's decided, but at this point, obviously the timeline's 2023 for implementation, which is great. That's what we called for. So thank you for that. But is there any more detail? Is that likely to be the UK CFD scheme, or are the options still open?
Yeah, Stephen, I'm actually going to see if there's anyone from the renewable electricity team who might be able to respond to that. They may not be able to, so I'll just give them a second to put up their hand. If not, I'm going to have to take that away. I don't know the details of the consultation. I know you were involved in a lot of the conversations around policy options at the time, and that kind of was one of the strong contenders, I suppose, but I'm not sure at what stage that is at the moment. I see a hand up. We may have someone.
Yeah. That's Zoe. Yeah. So Zoe, sorry, I muted you.
Is that me now?
Yeah.
Yep, can hear you now, great.
Just to say that those negotiations are still ongoing with BES, Stephen, so we're still seeing what options we can take forward. I would say that nothing is definite yet, so we're still trying to move forward and make sure that we get the best plan in place and what fits our needs best. And so we're happy if there's anything in particular that you still want to raise or discuss. And I know that we have a meeting lined up shortly for that purpose, but yeah, certainly I wouldn't say it's definitely going to be CFDs. There are obviously considerations in there and implications for the scheme itself and for ourselves. So it's about seeing how we take that forward, and that will be part of what the consultation will involve and how we can bring that forward to the best conclusion. But yeah.
That's great. So
that helps.
Yeah, no, thank you. I see we're starting. So Emma McDermott, I think is the first question I seen. Do you want to come in, Emma, and ask directly, or do you just want me to read it out? If you want to come in, I think you're able to unmute now. So
hi, yeah. So yeah, I'm coming obviously from like a domestic standpoint. So it was just kind of is like any like grants or initiatives out there for like new builds. It's obviously very hard at the minute to build a house financially with renewables. So it'd be great if there was something sooner rather than later. Just that's my question, if there's anything coming up now shortly.
Yeah, Emma, that's a good question. I suppose with the focus is to set up a grant scheme for energy efficiency retrofit for existing buildings. That's a priority because we know just how many buildings that have to be that we have to do significant work to achieve the savings that we need to achieve. Not in the next decade, but in the next 30 years. So the focus of the initial grant scheme is certainly going to be existing buildings. Having said that, the parameters of that scheme haven't yet been defined. So at the minute, it hasn't been agreed whether there will be, for example, a certain EPC level at which grants will be available, for example. These are the kind of issues that are under discussion. But what may be of interest, the energy efficiency scheme is also working quite closely with the low carbon heat scheme. So we are looking at exploring to what extent we can include support for low carbon heating, specifically heat pumps, with the energy efficiency measures, and seeing which buildings that these would be most effective in, because we know that you need much more energy efficient buildings, for heat pumps. So the parameters of the retrofit scheme haven't been fully defined yet. It's like the emphasis is intended to be on existing buildings, but I'm not sure if that will leave any window for the installation in new buildings at this point in time. But it's an important point, as you mentioned, the cost of new builds. As new energy standards, as new building regulations come into effect, we need to find a way as much as possible of ensuring that we have the supply chain and the skills in place so that we can start to see costs fall for the installation of these measures as well. And that's something that we'd like to achieve as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you, Meabh, and thank you, Emma, for the question. Brendan, do you want to come in with your question? I'm certainly interested in this one myself.
Hi. It's really just, you mentioned a few legislative changes, and I appreciate there's probably a lot of legislation needed in the back end of this in various ways. And is there early timeframes in them? And more particularly, what does the fall of Stormont potentially mean for this? Because legislation not passing in any way is very dangerous for this. But do we have a backup at this stage, because we don't have any more time?
Yeah, so I suppose two-part question. Do we have an idea of what legislative changes are required? We have a sense of some of the broad changes, and we would have understood some of those broad issues even a couple of years ago. So to what extent, for example, the duties and obligations of the regulator, again, a very strong response in consultations. So duties and obligations of the regulator and the department with regards to energy sustainability. So there's the high level ones. We've identified some, people have told us others. But then there's the specific ones, which is, as we work through policy, what is it actually that we need to achieve, and where are the legislative barriers to that? And that's something that each policy team will be identifying as they go along. So we don't know just yet if we will be taking forward a single new energy bill to try and capture all of those changes, or whether we can tweak some existing legislation to enable the policy development that we need. So it's kind of a work in progress. It's not a straight answer to your question, but we're trying to identify the high level ones as well as some of the specific ones, and saying, can we take some forward faster than others, or do we need to roll it all up into a single bill? Your second question is one for the politicians among us. What I would say is the energy strategy isn't a Department for the Economy strategy. It is an executive strategy. The executive has set the direction of travel. There's very little we can do about the fall or otherwise of Stormont, but we have an agreed action plan and an agreed strategy. And I would hope that that agreement by the existing executive is enough to enable us to continue with at least the most important bits of this strategy, even without a government. Having no government definitely makes things an awful lot more complicated, as we learned the last time.
Thank you. And it was something in my own work I've been keen to secure as much as we can before May, you know, because yeah, there's certainly uncertainty between now and May. I'll maybe not say more on it than that. Okay, David Thompson, would you like to come in with your question regarding support schemes around heat and geothermal?
Thank you, Stephen, for your opportunity to speak. I noticed there was a tech chat in there, Meabh, you'd said regarding support schemes for renewable energy, and that there were trials and demos on emerging heat options. I think you gave the example of geothermal. How is this to be rolled out? Is it going to be within your own departments, or are there going to be opportunities and schemes available to local government within Northern Ireland, such as councils?
I know that there is, thanks David, I might have to take that one away. I'm not sure I fully understand the exact question. There is a proposal in terms of geothermal heat. There's quite a lot of work has been done by the Geological Survey NI to progress a geothermal heat project, and that's obviously in locations, that's where the locations are appropriate, you know, where we have the right geology. In terms of so there's two schemes, there's geothermal and then there's the low carbon heat. And as I said, the low carbon heat support is going to be tied in with the, certainly part of it, with the energy efficiency support scheme. And the parameters of that haven't been defined yet. So whether that is kind of an area based or whether that's available across all Northern Ireland, it's still to be confirmed. But if you want to, because it's a heat question and the heat team may be able to answer that a little bit better, I can maybe take an email, or if Stephen or Judith puts us in touch afterwards, I can direct you to the heat team. They may be able to answer that question more specifically for you.
Sure, yeah, that's not a problem.
Great. Maybe the best way is if we, with your consent, to share your email, Meabh. So if we send that on to David, and then you can pick it up that way. Great.
Yeah.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, are there any further questions? It asked people to write them in just in case we got a load and I had to do a bit of triage. But if people just want to put their hands up and come in and ask it directly, save you typing, you're welcome to do so. Otherwise, we might give everyone 15 minutes of their day back. Oh, Anne, do you want to come in, Anne, or are you happy? I can read it out if you prefer.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can indeed. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just was wondering if Meabh could confirm that, in recognising that, you know, there are lots of citizens who want to be active in either producing energy or in how they use their energy. Can you just confirm that there will be some kind of support, financial and in other ways, to bring about more community energy projects in Northern Ireland?
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, I think it is one of the things that, you know, when I mentioned about community energy and active consumers, I think there's a really big spectrum of engagement that we're going to have to try and address. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do it all at once. And I suppose when I talk about energy efficiency support, that's effectively asking people to do things in their own home. So it's changing behaviours in their own home, potentially, you know, changing the way in which they use energy, or changing the way in which they use energy to get around, and that's the transport question. But it's also implementing measures in their own homes, which is to say the retrofit, the insulation, the cavity wall, the potential for, you know, for solar installations, for example. So there's a huge amount, even at the domestic level, that we know we're going to have to communicate and raise awareness of, engage with people, bring them with us, build their understanding, and also then get them to take decisions, and in some situations change the way in which they live and change the way in which they even sometimes spend their own money. So there's quite a lot within that, and we're addressing that through, as I say, the information and awareness, the advice that's available when we get a one-stop shop set up, as well as the various schemes that we'll be setting up this year. But I know that your question is going beyond that to community energy and the opportunities for community energy projects, and that is, it is within the strategy. It is a commitment that we will continue to assess and develop policy to facilitate citizen, or they're called citizen energy communities now, I think, rather than community energy, but to see where we can be most helpful and how we can facilitate that engagement, and is it, as I said earlier, is it about facilitating the kinds of schemes that have already happened, which is, for example, the kind of the turbines or the solar cooperatives, or is it broader than that? I think there's an awful lot more that we could be doing in Northern Ireland on community energy, and there is still a commitment in the strategy to support that.
Okay, thank you on that. And I suppose just you'll be aware, Anne, and perhaps yourself, Meabh, that we published a report. I did say it's one of the ones that wasn't covered in my slides, but did say we had a bit of a plethora of reports last year. But we'd one, Empowering You, which was very much, I suppose, looking at those medium scale projects. So, you know, if it is, for example, the CFD that we join currently, that's restricted to projects over 5 megawatts. But we've seen different setup in the Republic of Ireland to encourage community projects, and so the Empowering You report looked at projects 1 to 5 megawatts and how, you know, the benefits that can bring going forward, and certainly we with small scale working group that was that funded that report. But I suppose, although we call ourselves small scale, you know, it's larger than the house, you know, rooftop PV. It's the medium 1 to 5 megawatt. You know, that can maybe be done from our point of view in conjunction with larger scale. Obviously, then, like the rooftop solar, we would see is maybe requiring a different type of support. But you know, that report, again, another one on our website. If anyone on the call is more interested, wants to get more detail on that. And yep, Judith linked it. Thank you.
There's just actually, just going back to David's question on councils, it's not in the action plan for this year, but the energy strategy does talk about facilitating support for councils. So it's not being defined, but potentially similar to the current energy management strategy for central government, and the funding that's been made available for that. Is we are looking at what that model might look like for councils as well in Northern Ireland.
Great. Okay, a final call for questions. Okay, I think that's us then, Meabh. Listen, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you everyone for attending. As I say, keep an eye on the events page of the RenewableNI website for the details of future webinars. Say we will be doing a series throughout the year, and equally, if you've ideas, things you'd like to see us cover, let us know, and we'll try and schedule them in as best we can. They'll be focused around power and renewable electricity. That's what we do. So you know, on some of the other aspects of the strategy is for others, but that'll be the focus. But anything within the power sector, just give us a shout. Meabh, thank you very much, and
thank you.
I'll speak to you soon, I hope.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone. Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.